some of the most savage creatures on earth that go unnoticed. Like, you ever think about, nobody thinks about pigeons, bro. And they're just out there so savage. Hey guys, welcome back to the Electric Bike Laboratory. I'm Samil, and today we're going to be building a 20S 2P downtube battery with Samsung 50S cells, so let's get right into it. Okay, so the cell we're going to be using is a Samsung 50S cell with 5000 milliamp hours of capacity, and it can do 25 amps of continuous current and then 45 amps of current up to 80 degrees. And it's a 21700 cell or 2170 cell. So for our pack, we're going to be using a DP7 downtube base with a DP4 lid. So we're going to be using these custom 3D printed cell holders, which we're going to be putting the Samsung 50S cells in a 20S 2P configuration. And we're going to be using these copper plates to spot weld the cells together, and they can do 5 times the current nickel can, so it's really great. So you don't have to stack nickel pieces on top of each other, and they're really good for spot welding reliably. So the first step is to put all the cells into the cell holders in our 20S 2P configuration. So when you're putting these cells in, it's always good to check the voltage of each cell to make sure they're within the same range. So you want to have like a maximum difference of 0.01 volts. But these cells we're using is brand new out of the box, and they should be around 3.45 volts each. Okay, so here we have all the cells laid out now, and we can put the other half the cell holders in and put it together. And since we have 2 cells in a parallel group that can do up to 50 amps continuous, and 20S is 72 volts in series. Okay, so we're going to be welding the first side now, and I'm going to be using the copper plates. And to weld these copper plates, I'm only using about 40 joules. They don't need that much power to weld on. They weld on pretty easily. So let's get right to it. So I'm doing about 2 to 3 welds on each cell, which is more than enough. Okay, so here we have our first side spot welded. As you can see, I've isolated the positive terminal and the negative terminal, and then the rest of the groups get welded together. And then let's get on to the other side. So here we have the other side spot welded, and the pack is fully welded now. And as you can see, these welds are really strong. If you pull on one of them, it'll lift the whole pack up together. So very strong and reliable welds with the copper plates. Okay, so the next step would be to sort of insulate the pack with Kapton or high heat resistant tape. So I'm going to leave these balance tabs exposed, and then I'm going to cover the rest with Kapton tape. So on this side, I'm going to cover everything except the positive terminal, because I'm going to be directly soldering the positive discharge wire onto that plate right there. So everything else I'm going to cover up. Okay, since the BMS is going to sit on top like that, I'm not going to be able to use some of the balance tabs. So I'm going to snip them off and then solder those leads right onto the copper plates. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is put fish paper around the side of the pack where the BMS and the balance leads will go on. So I put fish paper around the pack where the balance leads will run, and also where the BMS will sit on. Okay, so as you can see, this is the same BMS here, but on this BMS, which I'm going to be using, I desoldered these wires off, and then I'm going to solder on my own 12 gauge wires to length. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is add some more solder onto these solder joints and then pre-solder these wires and then solder them on. As you can see, now I've soldered the battery negative wires and power negative wires onto the BMS. So these are 12 gauge wires. Okay, next thing I'm gonna do is glue down the BMS onto the pack, and then I'm gonna solder the battery negative wires onto the negative terminal, and then I'll run the balance leads. Okay, so for the next step, I'm gonna scratch this battery negative tab, and then I'm gonna pre-solder it, and then also snip these wires and then pre-solder them and then solder it on. Next, I'm gonna scratch and pre-solder these tabs for my balance leads, and wherever there are no tabs, I'm gonna put a solder point for the balance lead to go on. Okay, next I'm going to put this double-sided sticky tape around the pack so the balance leads can stick on and then run on the side of the pack. And these are the balance leads that came with the ANT BMS. So there's 22 leads in total, and the positive will get 2 leads at the end. Okay, so the first lead, which is a negative lead, I ran it around and then right to the battery negative terminal, and then the rest of the leads will go alternating each side. So anytime a balance lead crosses over another set of leads, I will put a piece of Kapton to kind of separate it. So I'm going to put a piece of fish paper so the balance lead can run right on the fish paper instead of on top of the cells. Okay, so next you can turn on the BMS using this power wire that was provided with the ANT BMS. So you can plug it in right here and then use a single cell and then put the red on the positive and the black on the negative. That'll make a beeping sound, which means the BMS is on. And then you can use the ANT BMS app to set up the BMS. I'll show you what that's like. So right when you turn the BMS on, you can see the time that it's been running. So our BMS has been running for 4 minutes. And if you scroll down, you can see all the groups here. So all the groups are reading, 20 groups, every group around 3.45 volts. And you can go to control, and then you can turn on the charge and the discharge MOSFETs. You can click lithium ion and set that, and then after that you can go to the parameters. You can go to fast setting, get 20S, 10 amp hours, save that. And if you go to your voltage parameters, we'd like to set our cell high protect to 4.25 volts and then cell high recover to 4.15. Save that. And then also pack voltage high recover, we set that to 85. Okay, then you can click save, and then you can go to your balance parameters and cell balance limit, set that to 4.25. And then cell balance start at 3.8. So when the cells are charged up to 3.8, it'll start balancing it. And then that should be good. And then your BMS is set up and it should be good to go. Now we will charge it and discharge it, do a cycle, and then see if the cells are good. Okay, so after your balance leads are on, you can turn on the ANT BMS, and to do that you can use this power wire which was provided by the ANT BMS. So now we're going to do the base preparation. This is the DP7 base which the pack is going to go on. So we're going to put on our charge wires and then our discharge wires as well as the indicator in. So here I measured up to length the positive charge and then the negative charge as well as the negative discharge and the positive discharge wires. So let's put it on the base. Okay, so on the charge port, that leg on the right side there is the positive, and then the one on the left is the negative, and then the one in the middle does not get used, so I'm going to snip that off. That. And then also I'm gonna scratch the pins and then pre-solder them, and then same thing with the charge port. So on the pins here, the positive 3 and 2 we're gonna use for the positive of the battery, and then the 1 and the negative we're gonna use for the negative. Okay, and then I'm gonna cut off these little tabs in between the posts so the charge wires can kind of seat in there and then run along the side. So for the charge wires, I'm gonna strip them just a tiny bit off the end and then pre-solder them and then solder it on to the charge port, and then I will put heat shrink over it. Then I will run it along the side and then solder it to the pins. Okay, so the negative wire I'm gonna run around the lock here, and then I'm gonna put some glue there to hold it in place so it won't get crushed by the lid post when it goes on. So this button here is for the indicator, and then you can kind of seat that in there into the case. And then you can slide your indicator. We don't have a 72 volt indicator, so we're going to use a 52. And the positive wire we're going to run to the 14th group, which would be indicate like the 52 volts of the pack. The negative wire you can solder right on to the negative terminal, but the positive wire you're going to have to run to the 14th group directly on the battery. So the positive wire I kind of folded over like that so the battery won't slide against it or crush it by going on top. And then I'm also going to put some glue over that exposed positive leg right there and then cover it up. So next step would be putting the positive discharge and then the negative discharge wires on. So once again, the positive will go on the left 3 pins, and then the negative will solder onto the right 2. And then I will put some glue over it to make sure they won't arc together and sort of put some protection over it. By putting this positive wire on the indicator on the 14th group, it's gonna think that the pack is a 52 volt pack. So that'll work out because the indicator is a 52 volt indicator. But if you put this right at the 20th group where the positive terminal is, it'll always show full because the battery is never gonna reach below 60 volts. Which a 52 fully charges to 58.8, so it'll always think it's full. So it's a good idea to put this onto the 14th group. That way, when the pack is draining, it'll show all the groups draining together and the indication will be accurate. Okay, so there is our base, which is fully prepped and ready for the battery to go on. And over here, we're now going to use our switch here because unfortunately the ANT BMS does not have a switch, so we're just going to leave it and it won't be a functioning switch. Okay, so now we're going to do the base, and then for the base that's the first part and this is the second part of the base, and then we have the pins. So the pins will seat in here like this and then go into the base, and then the discharge wires will come out the side. As you can see the pins here, we're going to be using the right 3, the positive 1 and 2 for the positive discharge, and then the left 2, the negative, and the 3 for the negative discharge. So here I have two 12 gauge wires cut to length, which I'm going to solder onto the pins. So I'm going to scratch the pins first and then pre-solder the pins as well as the wires. Then I can solder the wires onto the pins very easily. After I soldered the wires onto the pins, I'm going to put 2 pieces of shrink over it just to protect it and stop it from coming into contact with one another. So I have the shrink over the wires now, and then the next step would be seating these pins into the base, the second part of the base. So as you can see, you just run the wires through this hole like this, and then you can seat the pins in, and then you can put it onto the base. So after you put the second part of the base in with the first, you can put your bolts in and then tighten it either with a screwdriver or a gun. After the base is bolted on, next step I'm going to do is put this XC60 connector onto the wires. Before I do that, I'm going to use 2 pieces of shrink and shrink over the wires. So I will put the first longer part of the shrink on, and then the second part can go on. First I will shrink the first part with my heat gun. When you're shrinking the first part, what you want to make sure is that it's seated into the base all the way, so the wires are covered up. And then you can slide on your second piece of shrink, and don't shrink it just yet. Wait till you put the XC60 connector on, and then you can slide up that second piece of shrink and then cover it up. Now I will solder my wires onto the XC60 connector. I will use 2 pieces of shrink. I will put it in beforehand, then solder the wires and then run the shrink over. Shrink this part up with the heat gun. Then I will slide over my second piece of the shrink that was already put in the wires, and then I will shrink that part up. Once that is done, I will take a bigger piece of shrink and then cover off half of the XC60 connector. This is the bottom of the pack where the balance leads are running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these 3D printed plastic tabs so the battery will actually rest on the tabs instead of putting pressure on the balance leads. So what I'm going to do is put some glue on each of these tabs and then paste it in between the balance leads, so the battery will actually sit on the tabs instead of the balance leads. So here's a temperature sensor that comes with the ANT BMS. It comes with a set of 2 temperature sensors. So one I will put on the first half of the battery and then the other one on the second half. And here, as you can see, I made slits here so the temperature sensor can seat in and go right up against the cell. So what I'm going to do is carefully take off some of the Kapton and then take the temperature sensor and put it right up against one of the cells, and then I'm going to hit it with some glue and cover it up. And then I will seal it up and cover that part up. And then on the other side, I'm going to do the same process. Take the other temperature sensor and then seat it in and put it right up against one of the cells. After the temperature sensors are in, further on I'm gonna wrap the pack up with more Kapton just to cover up the balance leads, and then I'm gonna put fish paper around the pack as well. And then I will put some glue over each balance tab so it's not exposed and kind of sealed. Then I will cover the battery negative and the power negative ports with glue as well, just to seal it. Then I will put fish paper around the pack, and here I'm going to leave the balance leads exposed in case in the future you want to unplug it to check the balance of the pack or rebalance the pack manually. Then here I'm going to cut the fish paper so it just covers the balance leads and won't go over the tabs. And after that, I can sort of neatly organize the temperature sensor wires on top of the pack. Here I ran a red wire from the 14th group up as an indicator wire so it can connect to the 52 volt indicator on the base, and then I will cover the sides up with fish paper, and then I will use this insulating blue tape to sort of wrap the whole pack. It serves the same purpose as blue heat shrink, keep the pack insulated and protected. Now I will put the pack onto the base, so you can seat the pack into the base like this, and then I will solder my negative discharge wires to the negative discharge wire on the base, and then I will solder on my positive discharge wire right onto the positive terminal, and then the indicator wires together. The pack is on the base now, so I will put some extra insulating blue tape over the indicator wire so the negative discharge wire can run safely over it without directly coming into contact with the indicator wire. Then I will use glass tape, fiberglass tape to secure the negative discharge wires on top of the pack and organize it. And then afterwards, I'm gonna take some more insulating blue tape and then cover over the positive terminal of the battery and then fully insulate the battery. Okay, and after that is completed, you can put the lid on the pack. Okay, so the final step is to put the lid on. So I will flip the battery over and then put each of the screws in and then sort of use a gun to tighten it and secure the lid on. After that, as you can see, the indicator is working, and then you can put the base on the battery. And you can use your key to lock the base in. And that's basically the last step, and then your battery is completed. So that's our build of a 72 volt 10 amp hour Downtube battery using Samsung 50S cells. Leave us a like and comment if you have any questions or thoughts, and subscribe if you haven't, and stay tuned for the next one. We'll see you soon.